Also go ahead and begin today with let's go ahead and begin today by introducing to you our chairman, Peter Finn. Peter Finn is the Chief Learning Officer for the Society of Women Engineers. He is going to be on this call just a little bit later today, and he'll have a few words for you at the end of our time together. Peter is located in downtown Chicago and does a great job. He just was installed as our new chairman for the next 2 years. So we certainly all look forward to working with Peter. So keep in mind that we also have Jim Barnes. Jim Barnes is with OSHA, and he's a senior advisor in the Office of Assistant Secretary of the Department of Labor, or OSHA. He's our new treasurer for this year as well. So it is nice to recognize Jim and his contributions to the organization, as well as our secretary, the position that he's held for the last several years. And he is the general manager of training and certification at the Linux Foundation in Austin, Texas. So we're grateful to have Clyde on our executive committee. Other members of our executive committee, Chris Neubauer is no stranger. He is the director of human resources for the global organization Rotary International. I'm sure you've all heard of Rotary Club. And Chris is the head of director of human resources for that organization, also based in Chicago. An outstanding businessman that we have grown to thoroughly enjoy having on our board of directors and executive committee is Mr. Andrew Kauser. He's the former CVO of TPC Training Systems. He's in the middle of a career shift right now to several different organizations. And he is also on our executive committee, and it's a real pleasure to work with him. Also on our call today, a person that we just introduced a few minutes ago is our new vice chair of our Council on Standards Development. This is Carol Martsolf, and Carol said hello just a few minutes ago. She's going to be filling in for Stuart Karasik, our chair of the council. He cannot be here today. I believe he's on an airplane as we speak. But Carol will be able to answer some of the questions about some of the things and how they were, some of the explanations behind why things were added to the standard and modified. Also, too, we'll have Dan Hiltz. Dan Hiltz is our commission chair. Dan is a veteran IACET staff member and is just a really awesome guy to work with. Dan and I are going to be going to India for the next 2 weeks, starting just on Friday. Dan and I are taking the IACET message to 3 cities in India, and Dan is going to go with us and help promote IACET and our cause there on that. Yes, we love Dan. Jenny Price says we love Dan. Absolutely. Consummate professional he is. Thrilled to be working with him. Also, too, I'm Joe McClary. I've introduced myself, and before we wanted to begin, I wanted to introduce to you one of our new staff members. Since we've had our last town hall, IACET is, if some of you who may know Susan Courtney, Susan was essentially had to move to Scotland. Her family relocated there, and we brought on, really happy to say, a veteran educator, Terry LaLaberte. She came from the American Society of Safety Engineers, and so we are very, very happy to have Terry here. If you have a question about the accreditation, once you're in the process, you'll be working with Terry on that, especially. So remember, if you used to work with Susan, and now you'll be working with Terry. Terry is Director of Accreditation and Special Projects, which means she does accreditation and all the other things that we need to do. She, as a matter of fact, was teaching in downtown Chicago today. I'm not sure if she's had a chance to make it on board yet today or not, but she should be here before the end of the hour as well, and maybe she can say hi before we end. So as we begin, also, we are looking at the GoToWebinar delivery system here that we have. Keep in mind, we can't unmute everyone. We always get a question about why can't we unmute everyone? Well, if we unmute everyone, we hear everybody's dog, everybody's interruptions, and it's untenable and unmanageable. So we have to keep everybody muted, but that doesn't mean we can't see your questions. It also doesn't mean that we can't see your hand. So if you have a hand, if you have a question, you can type it in the box that you see here in the red, or if you'd like to raise your hand and talk there, you can raise your hand and we will call on you perhaps to answer a question and or to ask a question, and you can exchange with us verbally if you like. Especially for those of us on the commission, if you have something to contribute, we'd be happy. As a matter of fact, why don't we test that? Why don't we see if everybody's with us today? Go ahead and raise your hand. Click that box on your screen, and I can see that my screen's lighting up right now. All of you are with me. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. System's working great. So I'll clear all those hands right now, and let's take a look at some of our objectives for what we're trying to do today. The objectives for what we're here to do today are to, number one, talk about the new requirements in the ANSI IACET 2018 standard. We want to talk about our new badging and micro-credentialing standard that's under development. We're also going to look and tell you about our competency-based training standard, and it's also under development, but something that to help you all understand what we're looking to do in the next 6 months or so, and some other exciting initiatives, including our Petroleum and Natural Gas addendum. We're sharing a little bit with you about that as well. Also, let's take a look. Let's do a quick poll. I'd like to go ahead and launch a poll for you today. And we're going to ask you, why are you here today? This will help us modify our presentation to ensure that it is as relevant as we can possibly make it for you. So if you go ahead and just tell us why you're here, and you can choose more than one answer, by the way. You're here to find out about the CET standard, the badging standard, competency-based training, or you're just lonely in the virtual world and just want to hang out. Believe it or not, there will be some who choose that. Bill Edgar, I know you. You're out there, and don't you choose number 4. Bill's never lonely. Bill's one of the most outgoing people I know, right, Bill? So right now, let's go ahead. We'll close this poll, and then this will take a look. You can see that most of the people are here today to learn about the new standard. Also, too, it's going to be very, very interesting. It looks like a close, or not a close second, but number 2 is the competency-based training standard, and certainly badging as well. So, and it looks like we're in good stead on the 4th one. So we'll go ahead and hide that poll, and we'll continue with our presentation today. All right, so let's talk. Let's get into. Pardon me. Let's get into our new 2018 standard, why it's different, where you can go for resources, and so on. And before we ever begin any of this, one of the things I'd like to tell all of you who are engaged in our standard, who are accredited providers, here's where you can get the new standard, by the way. If you're an accredited provider already, we're making this available to you without technically purchasing the actual hard copy of the standard if you're already a member, because we want you to know what the standard is. So if you go to IACET.org and you click the resources link up at the top menu and you come down, you're going to see standards and application resources. If you take a look at that link, sometimes there'll be a little lock by that, which means that you have to log in, and you have to be a full accredited provider to get access to that. Individual members, if you haven't, you have to pay for the standard to be able to view that. But if you're a full member and you're already accredited, we make a host of resources available to you, and you can start to see some of those here in the list. Let's take a look at a few of the things that we're providing, and let me tell you about some of these important documents that we have. So as you look in that list, the first thing you're going to see is a guide to accreditation, the program policy manual. This was just reorganized, and our director of accreditation had a big role in that. And it's essentially a condensation. We used to have policies in a couple different places, and we have condensed those. Now, if you're interested in the continuing education training program or accreditation program, this is the policy manual that you'll be interested in. For those of you who are online in our workshop today, we have made that available for you in the handouts area. It's our accreditation guide, and you can view that, and you can review some of the new things that may apply to you there. Generally speaking, the program runs much the same. We've just cleaned some things up and made the policies more clear in the new guide. Nevertheless, important document to review and to be familiar with. The second thing that I would encourage you to do, especially for those of you who are interested in the differences between the 2013 and 2018 standard, is to take a look at what we call the crosswalk document, or the comparison document between the 2013 and 2018 standard. This document will go line by line and show you what changes were made. Significant effort went into creating this document just to ensure that you're very, very clear on how things have been modified and reworded. Now, we'll look at the standard in just a few minutes and take a look at some of the things that have changed, or at least the big things that have changed. The next thing on the list that you'll see is the actual 2018 standard for continuing education and training. This is just the standard. It's not the application. It's simply the new standard without guidance and things like that. Most of you probably won't be interested in that. You'll probably be interested in one of these next two documents. The next two documents are the actual standard application. Now, here is one of the, if you're taking notes, here is one of the big changes in IACET accreditation. One of the big things. This, by the way, somebody had just asked if this presentation will be online. It will be on our YouTube channel. It certainly will. Just go to IACET.org and click the YouTube channel up at the top, and you will be able to see this presentation shortly after our conclusion today. So currently, this is one of the big changes. If you're taking notes, here it is. IACET now has a different application for its initial applicants, people or organizations that are seeking accreditation for the first time. Keep that in mind. Seeking accreditation for the first time, you will use the initial application. For those of you who have had accreditation and you're just renewing, you're reaccrediting, the process is more streamlined. In fact, Carol Martzoff has been in charge of this reaccreditation application, and I know she has been up to her nose in these applications. Carol, would you care to just quickly summarize a little bit about the main differences in between these two, between the initial application and the reaccreditation application, and give us just a broad perspective on what IACET was trying to do by implementing this new reaccreditation application?
Sure. Prior to the 2018 reapplication, primarily it seemed like, when you completed an application for your initial AP status, it pretty much was like the same thing when you had to reapply 5 years later. And so we've completely streamlined that. It is not the same as the initial application. It's shorter. It asks for more narrative descriptions about what has changed in the past 5 years, what improvements have you made to your programs in the past 5 years. So it basically focuses on the way that you've improved your processes and procedures over the past 5 years, rather than a whole stream of every single thing that you're doing, and all of your process and all of your procedures that are the same things that you put in your application 5 years earlier. So we've made it shorter, we've made it less onerous for you, and we're primarily focusing on what has changed over the previous 5 years.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We just got to note that there may be a link that's not functioning right there on our on that page. So we will be fixing that here in just a couple of moments. That'll be fixed as soon as possible, probably before we get off the line here today. Thank you, Andrea from Siemens. We appreciate you reporting that. We are on that, and that'll be fixed here very, very soon. Carol, thank you for that. We appreciate it. So essentially, as I look at the reaccreditation application, it's more about outputs. Would you agree with that, Carol?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So it's not so much about, while it's about the output of your processes, not so much communicating what they are up front. So we're happy about that. So it's a more efficient process. It's a more friendly process, and certainly hopefully most will find that it's much shorter as well, and more efficient, a better use of your time. Let's also take a look at a few other things here. We have download resources. IACET is recreated all of its resources, from our sample design documents, how to calculate CEUs, our self-audit checklist, numerous other documents below what you see there have all been added to this area that you can now access. Again, members and full accredited providers can download this at IACET.org. Just click on resources and then application and resources, and you can log in there. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at a few things in the actual application that we wanted to emphasize for you today about what's new in the IACET standard. So I'm actually going to bring up the standard here. You should be able to see this on your screen. And well, I've highlighted 3 major items. And Carol, I'll need you, if you don't mind, if I miss one, feel free to let me know if another one in here that you would like to emphasize that needs to be spoken about today. But I've picked out 3 major changes. A lot of the standard is essentially reworded or clarified, so you shouldn't have any additional concerns about if there's anything new. So the purpose of what I'm about to go through is essentially what's the big new requirements. One of the Lee Parsons asked, is this standard available in Spanish? Unfortunately, it is not at this time. We do have plans to do that, but it's going to be into next year. And we've got certain challenges that I won't share here today, but that go with that. But certainly that is something that we would like, because we do have a growing interest in Central and Latin and South America. So thank you, and other Spanish-speaking places. So thank you for that question. Another question real quick, will we still have access to the 2013 application if it's sunsetting? Yes, the application is going to be listed there. And so, yes, when we say sunsetting, essentially there will be providers who are still submitting the 2013 application until the end of December. Okay, so if you have not yet submitted your 2013 application, you need to contact our office by email, and we will ensure that you can submit that 2013. Because if you try to submit a new application today, it's going to default to the 2018 standard that went live November 1st. So keep that in mind. If you want to still submit that, talk to our office, and they can press one button that makes it very, very easy that you have access back to your 2013 application that you can submit before the end of the year. Actually, you all should have received emails, several emails, in fact, about that over the last 6 months, informing you and giving you direction on what to expect. So keep that in mind. So let's go to now that we've taken care of a few of the questions. Also, too, I see that our chairman, Peter Finn, is here. Peter, welcome, and we'll turn it over to you here toward the end of our time together. Let's go ahead and look at a few of the changes. Let's scroll down to the first one, 1.4. This is one of the changes. The provider shall have a process to measure effectiveness of its development, administration, delivery, and support of its education and training. Now, this is a new one. Now, some of you may say, well, this sounds a lot like program evaluation. And you're right, it does sound like that, but it's meant to go at a higher level. Prior to the 2018 version, IACET did not have a requirement that your organization evaluate itself in light of its overall effectiveness toward meeting its mission. Now, only you can ultimately determine whether or not you're meeting your mission, but it's important to sit down and have a process by which you do evaluate that. So this is a high level. Now, this is not necessarily, say if you're a large conglomerate and you have a single mission statement that has nothing to do with continuing education and training. We're not talking about evaluating the effectiveness of an organization's overall big mission that's not pertaining to continuing education and training. What we're talking about here is the subset, the department, the division that has to do with training. It's that organization. It's the organization that most of you work for. It's the work in or in charge of. It's that organization that is accredited that we would look to see if you're meeting your mission, if you are, and what process you have on declaring or being able to document that you have a process to um, to to evaluate the overall organizational effectiveness as training is concerned. Carol, was that summary? Would you like to add anything to that explanation for 1.4?
Well, yeah, you did a really great job with that explanation, but I would add that whether you work for like a government agency or for a private consulting firm, it's always good practice to show that you're meeting your mission and that you are effective and your department is effective. So this, I think, will be like an overall good thing to do and just best practice. But yeah, you explained it very well, Joe.
Well, that's a great thing to emphasize. So thank you. That is absolutely correct. So if you have any additional questions past that, you can put them in the chat or you can call on us and through some other media. So let's take a look at the second major change that we would add. And again, as you look through here, much of the is essentially reworded or clarified. So keep that in mind. 3.3, the provider shall have a process to document individuals' professional development activities for ensuring those who are involved in the design, development, delivery of learning events remain current in subject matter material and learning events. Now, this is not a huge change. In the past, IACET did have require professional development plans, but this breaks it down just a little bit more. So instead of just, for example, we know that oftentimes there are many educators or subject matter experts who don't keep their skills sharp in adult learning theory or adult learning methods. So you're going to see here those two things, and you'll see here that we want to ensure that our providers and their instructors they have engaged to remain current in two things: the subject matter, and that can be done in many different ways. They can attend conferences, they can subscribe to journals, they can teach at conferences. There's a number of things that they can do to stay relevant with subject matter. And then the learning methodology. Now, some of these things, what we would suggest are you choose what's right for your group in regard to learning methodology. Perhaps it's involvement. Perhaps it's membership in ATD. Perhaps it's involvement. Perhaps it's a class. Perhaps IACET has a train the trainer workshop that some of you here today have taken. We have a 2-day workshop that essentially helps subject matter experts adopt quality adult learning principles and integrate that into their instruction. So that's something that would count as far as ensuring that your instructors have not only a focus in their subject matter, but also in their learning methodology. Nobody's going to question oftentimes the subject matter expertise of an expert who's been in the industry for 30 years. It's often that those individuals, however, still need to maintain their focus on learning methodology as well. Carol, would you like to add anything on that one?
Yes, just as a caveat, I wouldn't want any prospective APs or current APs to worry about, like, let's just say you have like 200 classes a year. You don't have to track, like, let's say they're all 200 different instructors, that each of them are staying current in their subject matter. Like when you're audited by a site visitor, you can just show a sample of some of them. So just don't get bogged down, at least on your subject matter experts and your instructors if you have a ton of them. So when you have a site visit, and even when you're submitting your application, you don't have to submit 200 samples of each and every person's staying updated on their I guess their expertise and their subject matter. So just don't get bogged down on that part. That's just a caveat.
All right, thank you. So an important part of maintaining quality standards, again, is ensuring that your instructors are subject matter experts and experts in learning methodology as well, or at least familiar and actively seeking improvements. Any questions on 3.3 before we move on? If you do, feel free to put those in the questions area. Some of you still have questions on 1.4. Let's take a look back to 1.4 very quickly. Somebody said, can we give you an example of 1.4? Sure. And so, for example, if you have in 1.4, if I were to ask you this question, if we were to sit down on 1.4, and 1.4 again is evaluating your organizational effectiveness. And I were to ask you, how does your division, the group that does the training, how effective are you at what you do? How are you succeeding? I've asked that to a number of, and that's really the question that you need to ask yourself. And so when we ask this question, essentially it could mean a number of different things. And it's really up to you to provide any type of qualitative or quantitative evidence that would lead you to believe that you are being an effective provider. Perhaps it's an aggregate of evaluations that say this training was useful. If those of you who are familiar with Kirkpatrick's levels, so perhaps you're actually measuring maybe 6 months after the learning event, and you find out at a level 4 of Kirkpatrick's training model that the behavior has that it actually made a relevant difference in the overall effectiveness of the organization and toward achieving your objectives. If you know that that's occurred, that could be evidence toward complying with this particular item. Perhaps it's quantitative measures. Now, keep in mind that we do not need specific sensitive data. In other words, we would point to quantitative data, but if you don't want to give us your business plans or some things are very, very highly secure or part of your underlying confidential business plan, we don't need that type of data. Perhaps you could tell us in general what you've done and what the results of that analysis were. That would also be your completion rate. That's another major, another facet, another quantitative figure that could be included in the process to comply with 1.4. So for those, I think Elvis Moreland just asked the question: Could an LMS record contribute to meeting 1.4? Absolutely, Elvis. Yes, that is absolutely very strong. You could, again, completion rates, satisfaction rates, overall scores. How does that contribute not just to the program, but to your overall success as an organization? How is that contributing? That's what we want you to think through. And I think most of the input we've received back from this is very, very positive. Another question.
Joe,
Sure,
please.
I
was gonna contribute something. So one way that you can think of this is, how do you show your value and your effectiveness to your supervisor or to whatever group is above you? So if you do like an annual report, like that could be an example of it, or whatever you put together, whether it's a report, whatever documentation to show your value and your effectiveness to your organization in general, whoever is above you, that could be something that you use to satisfy this as well.
Yes, definitely. Good, thank you. One of the questions Jenny Price had was, what do we define by regularly? When we talk about regularly, this is a term that might appear regularly in IACET's documentation. IACET's very hesitant to prescribe and to prescribe specific timeframes that you need to operate within because of the different business models that exist. So, for example, when we say that you need to regularly evaluate your organization, that might mean every 6 months, or it could mean every 2 years. It depends on maybe the cycle at which you offer your education. Some groups are on a 2-year cycle. Some people are on a 3-year cycle. Some people are on a quarterly cycle. So it really depends. So IACET wants to maintain flexibility, and what you need to do is to be able to have a defensible, meaningful evaluation that comes up regularly. We hope that answers that question. We're also looking here, do we have to have a site visit even though we're in San Antonio and we're all online? The answer to that is yes. Site visits happen for all providers, especially online providers. It's a part of the verification process. It's a part of identity. It's a part of the integrity process that almost all, any type of accreditation like IACET's has a site visit, or at least most of them do, and we maintain that for quality control. So thank you, Maggie, for that question. Another question, when we bring in an industry expert, they might not have background in learning methodology. How can this meet this standard? We would expect in this case, this is exactly, Wendy, what this is meant to address. You bring in an industry expert and they don't have any background in learning or methodology, then we would suggest that that individual focus a little bit of their time, whether it's maybe it's, Wendy, your organization creating an instructor manual on Train the Trainer manual, or sending this person to one of the workshops, or having them review your expectations and giving them some proactive guidance on what they can do in your classroom or in your online environment. So essentially, this is exactly the situation that we're trying to ensure quality remains high in. It's these industries where we have experts coming in, but they know little or nothing about adult learning. Or perhaps in this case, you leverage the expertise and you have a course moderator that's the expert in adult learning, and then that moderator takes into effect and asks the questions and makes sure informal assessments happening and things of that nature. So Wendy, I hope that answers that question somewhat as well too. We're going to come back to some of these questions at the end. I see some of these we're repeating some of the same questions, so I'm going to move on to our next item, but I will stay online today, and as I'm sure Carol will for a little while, to answer all of your questions to ensure each question is answered. So let's move on to our next item. As we can see, we're scrolling through the standard. We've covered 3.3 about professional development, and I think we've got one more. And our last item here is this. Category 8, and this is regarding awarding CEUs. Now, this is not as difficult as it may sound, so some of you may have questions about this one. The provider shall have a process verifying that the learner who registers and participates in the learning event is the same learner who receives IACET continuing education units. So in this case, what we're looking for is a process by which you verify the learner's identity. Now, if this is internal training and your instructor knows all of the people who are going to be in training and they can facially recognize those individuals, then instructors will verify identity. Or, pardon me, in other cases, you may have thousands upon thousands of students and you don't know who is coming to take your course. In this case, you need to have, as we state here, there needs to be some type of identity check, meaning that you have a password protected LMS where you send the user an LMS and you have standard security protocols in place that would require a username and password to enter that. Those types of standard security protocols would be in place, and most of you already have that. What this is designed to prohibit are providers who would literally throw up or to post a SCORM module where people click through it and nobody knows who did it, or reading a PDF online and nobody really ever identifies student identity. Almost, this is one of the standards that came over to us from an analysis that we did on the United States Department of Education's requirements. It also, almost any other organization that has anything to do with instructional design and delivery has a component to ensure the verification of student identity. So this is probably something that most of you are following through on already. And so this is really actually, Carol, I'll go ahead and take a moment to pause here. Did you have any other additional criteria here or any additional specifications on the on 8.1 here?
Well, another example of this would be if you have an online training, a statement could, like, you could program a statement to pop up on the screen indicating, like the student would sign or click that, yes, they agreed to this, saying, you know, I am the person who registered for this, and basically saying that they are who they say they are. And if they click OK, then that's also a way that you can verify that that person is like who they say they are. Um, and everything else you said, Joe, I would agree with.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and take a couple questions here that we have coming in on 8.1. Number one, in-person training, should we ask for a photo ID? This is from Veronica M. So Veronica, the answer to that question is it depends. If you're doing internal training where your trainer knows and can facially recognize all of your staff, then that probably isn't going to be an issue, and that you can suggest that and state that in your process. If you don't know who the people are, say, for example, if you have a class where people sign in and they have to have a badge to get in their building, well, they've already identified themselves in some regard as a security control to get in the building. So that's another way. If you're a company and you're doing training and the people have to get in and show a badge to get in, well, then they have identified themselves coming in. If you have nothing, if you're in a public hotel and you have a number of people who are coming, then we would say yes, we would ask for the photo. We would suggest a photo ID or some other type of identification that would be needed to verify that in the in-person training. So we hope that answers that question. If not, feel free to follow up. Can that be a statement on the evaluation and say, I completed this training myself? This is from Karen. Karen, that is an attestment of them saying that they did that. Certainly that is a step in the right direction. That is certainly something that can be part of the process. However, that is not really verifying learner identity. So again, we would come back to, again, I completed this training, a legal attestment to them completing the training certainly could be a part of your process. In fact, I know firsthand in much of the training that I have, the regulatory groups that I've worked with in the past require precisely that, a statement that says, yes, I am the person who did this. But unfortunately, that in and of itself doesn't verify student identity. There still needs to be a password protected mechanism or some type of identity, either by an instructor or some other type of photo ID that's given. Again, and keep in mind, if there's questions about this and how your organization may need to efficiently implement this, please don't hesitate to contact us. And again, some people think, well, are employees from my company going to have to show ID? Well, not if they already have a badge, for example. So keep that in mind. So what we're trying to do here is to provide reasonable mechanisms that the person who's going to get the CEU is the person who actually took the course. So keep that in mind. All right, is the student ID from Tiffany W, is the student ID check more so online educational organizations? We would say yes, but I will tell you this, that's where it started, but I can tell you that this goes for classroom as well. If you're going to identify learner identification in online, why wouldn't we do it in the classroom as well? Now, we do understand that there are economical barriers, economical reasons that some providers would not want, there are some students would not want to cheat. It's not economical to have somebody come and sit there for so long and take a course for someone else. We understand all that. At the same time, we are charged with helping ensure the integrity of the continuing education unit. So that's so to ensure the integrity of the continuing education unit, that is one of the reasons that we felt it was necessary to not only do online verification, but to some reasonable degree in the classroom as well. So that's important. One of the questions is, how do we download the resources that are associated in this webinar? In your applet there, you should have something that says handouts. And if you go to the handouts, you should see the AP accreditation guide there. If you don't get it there, if you can't find that in your interface, sometimes if you're using an iPad or something like that, it might not show. I'm not sure. but you can get that free in the on the IACET.org site by going to the shopping cart and clicking the AP Accreditation Guide. Or if you're already a member, you can go and click on resources and then click standards and resources, and you can get the AP guide there as well. So lots of places there that you can get that. Would a sign-in sheet satisfy requirements of 8.1? This is from Luke W. Luke, a sign-in sheet is a step in the right direction. But there again, if the sign-in sheet is in a secure environment where people have had to show an ID, then sure. If it's off the street walk-in, a sign-in sheet doesn't really verify student identity. There needs to be, again, some resource, some way to identify the student. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a sign-in sheet. That could be. There could be, for example, if you send the student there's several ways to accomplish that. And I think from what I'm seeing here that we're going to need some additional FAQs on this particular item. As a matter of fact, I'll ask one of our customer service representatives, Amy Starchville, to make a note that we need some additional FAQs on how to apply with how to comply with 8.1. Wendy, yeah, we're coming with that link. It's going to be up. It might be just a few minutes after. The link, somebody said the link is not functioning on the site. That will be fixed within 1 hour if not before the end of this event, 1 hour at least after, if not before. So keep in mind, we are very aware of that, and we apologize for any inconvenience. Okay, so I think that's it right now. I'm going through a few of our other questions. Still on regard to site visits, yes, still need site visits. How does that work? We'll have to take how does site visits work under another, maybe after our session today. We will stay on board and answer a few of those questions that I don't think most people need, but for those of you who do, we're going to be happy to provide you with those answers as we proceed today. All right, so let's go through and back to our presentation very quickly. Again, we will come back. Also, too, IACET has a new program that we are just completing working on. It's not actually, it'll be complete around the first quarter of next year, and that's our badging standard. So for most of you, if you're not familiar with the whole badging issue, the badging world, the badging topic, how many of you issue certificates in your classes? Go ahead and raise your hand if you issue certificates in your classrooms. Certificates, anyone? If you have certificates in your classrooms, a great number of you have certificates. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and launch a poll here really quick. We're distributing a poll right now that's going to ask you, do you implement digital badges? While you're working on that, keep in mind, most of you who issue certificates, what's the best case? What happens to that certificate after it leaves your classroom or your learning environment? In the best case, it goes home to someone's wall, right? They put it on their wall. And I would bet that most of those learning programs, the certificates either go in a file folder or someplace that have absolutely they don't usually see the light of day again in many cases. In some cases they might. But essentially the badging program takes a credential that you earn, usually through what you would normally get in a certificate. And these the badges essentially are credentials that are portable. They're stackable. They lay out learning pathways for learners. Now, the big problem with badges, as a matter of fact, let's take a look really quick. And this is a huge educational phenomenon. And look here, we've only got 13% of organizations issuing digital badges. And when we say digital badges, what we really mean is live, active, dynamic certificates that actually show you the evidence of what's been obtained. So if you get a certificate for, say, doing X, Y, or Z, a lot of times the certificate will only give you the title of the class and how long it took. It doesn't give you whether or not you had to pass a test. It doesn't tell you about the educational curriculum that you learned about. It doesn't tell you if it was instructor facilitated or at a distance. It doesn't tell you much about the credential at all. And that's the problem that digital badges are designed to solve. The problem with digital badges, though, is this. There are many of them out there that mean absolutely nothing. Some of you have taken, say, for example, TripAdvisor. You've been to TripAdvisor, and some of you probably have badges that TripAdvisor gives you after you accomplish something. Well, TripAdvisor doesn't know if you did what they say you did. They don't know if it was you or someone else. They don't, and sometimes they'll give you badges for doing very, very simple things. And underlying that is essentially they're trying to harness your motivation to engage in that learning path or in that path to achievement. And that's all fine and well. But in the environment where badges are being used more and more as an active credential, badges essentially have to be meaningful and they need to meet a certain standard. And that's what this standard for badging was meant to accomplish. And so IACET's created, we have several different things. We've completed a draft standard. The additions at our board meeting just last October, our board of directors asked us to extend our badging standard to include what we call a taxonomy. And a taxonomy essentially divides up and categorizes types of badges that you would have. For example, was it a learning experience? Was it a personal achievement? Was it an activity? Was it something that you had to take a test on? Was it an academic experience? Or was it just essentially some type of event? Like, for example, if you look here, the Society for Automotive Engineers, SAE International, by the way, is our first organization to adopt the IACET accredited issuer accreditation standard. And so their badges meet these standards. But like if you're a thought leader, it means you had to do something very specific. And if you click on that badge, it would take you and show you a lot of metadata about what that badge is. A lot of times today, people think badges are simply JPEG files or they're just graphical images that show that you did something. Not so. Badges are supposed to be loaded with metadata that tell you about the actual learning that took place in the badge. So IACET's going to be doing a lot of work. We have actually in the first of the year, we're going to have a digital badge reader verification. It parses out the standard of the badge to ensure it's aligned with our IMS global standards and the IACET standards for the quality of the yes, Randy, go ahead.
Hey, you still have the poll up, not the PowerPoint, so I think people can't see the awesome things you're talking about.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks.
So there we have, for right now, we see the badging program, and we see the SAE International is, again, the first organization that has adopted the standard. This standard is still in development. So they've adopted the standard as it was. But in the future, we want to thank Kevin Perry, by the way. He is the Director of Professional Education at SAE International. He did a great job at helping us with this. The Badging Research Advisory Task Force will be finalizing. Also, too, one of the exciting things here is that we're working with IBM, Microsoft, and Pearson to refine this taxonomy and standard to make it as relevant as possible to the commercial world. So, thank you all for engaging on the badging standard. Any questions? I have a few things. Our completion certificates have QR codes that link to a website which details course curriculum and timeline. Is this comparable to a digital badge? Yes, Tanya. The problem with that is that it's only good for your company. And it's not a standard in which everybody adopts where we can have dependable credentials. Think about it like this. Microsoft, when you accredit or certify as a Microsoft certified systems engineer or something similar, they want a badge that everybody recognizes. And then if IBM wants to stack on top of that, they have a system that provides a credential in much of the same way. By the way, for those of you who noticed a couple of links broken on our downloads page, if you refresh your page now, that should be fixed. So thank you for that as well. We'll come back to just a few of these questions, and in just a few minutes on digital badging, we want to finalize our time together here in the last 10 minutes. Again, we're going to stay after the top to answer all your questions. We can't get them all in, unfortunately, in the hour, but we can give you the big things that I think most people are interested in and work our priorities like that. So let's go ahead and now look at our competency-based training standard. Now, it's very, very important that you understand that the IACET standard, the IACET accreditation program, is based upon the CEU, the Continuing Education Unit, which means that the CEU is time-based. In other words, it's 10 contact hours for every one continuing education unit. So when a person comes to a classroom that's giving CEUs, they're supposed to be there for the entire time, regardless of whether they're an expert or whether they're a novice in the course subject matter. The person needs to be able to, they technically under our current standard need to be there for the entire time, whether they need to be or not. This is something that industry has identified as oftentimes a large waste in a very, very inefficient way of educating. So in other words, instead of teaching to just the learning gaps, we're teaching to a one-size-fits-all approach. So what we see more and more in industry are the development of competency models, where a competency model is developed that specify what is competency in a particular area. Then that competency model is then applied in a competency-based training program. And if a learner comes into that program, they may need 3 hours of education, or they may need 60 hours of education and training. It depends on their competency. And if they can show competency, there's no need for them to engage. Some of you are familiar with the CLEP system in academics, where you can, quote, CLEP out of certain courses because you already have a shown relevant competency in those areas. So when you move from clock hour based education, where no longer it's not about the clock hours, it's about the mastery of the objectives, it's about the outputs, not so much the content of the course, but it's about the outputs of what the student shows competency in. Standards need to be followed in regard to that, because what is competency? What are the steps that an organization has to follow to implement a good competency-based training program? So let me ask you this very quickly. How many of you out there have a competency-based program? I'm going to go ahead and post that poll. How many of you are using a competency-based training program, a program that is based upon the results, not necessarily the clock hours? It's based upon the results, not necessarily the clock hour. All right, our results are coming in right now. So glad to have this participation. I'm going to close this poll. We're going to share the results, and then I won't leave them up like I did last time. So yes, here we go. We have 7 of most of you. Now here's something I need to, if you would like, IACET is looking for a couple things in regard to our competency-based training initiative. And let me go to a couple of those. And first, I do want to recognize the organization Assessment, Education, and Research Experts, ARI. They are our research consultant, and we have procured them contracted with them to help us develop this competency-based training standard. So let's take a look at a couple of the details. This competency-based training program that we're developing is going to require 3 different volunteer work groups, and you can be a part of one of those. And let me share with you what we're talking about here. Number 1, we have a CBT development.
Hey, Joe, I don't see your screen.
I did it again. So here, let's hide. Here we go. You didn't miss anything, thank goodness, because you were nice enough to tell me. So number 1, there's 3 work groups here that you can take part in. Number 1 are 3 groups that will have 1 you'll be able to take part in. The CBT Development Task Force, this is an invitation only, and these are experts in competency-based training with and have worked with numerous organizations. These are consultants. These are people who have been into competency-based training as a large part of their professional career. So we'll be working with some individuals on that task force. In addition to this particular task force, we'll be looking at a blue ribbon panel, what we call the advisory task force. And this is also an invitation-only group. And it is essentially some of the big names, and I can't tell you who some of those big names are because we're still in the process of inviting them. But most of these are authors on the subject, people who have published books on the subject. Very, very well-known people in continuing education and training will serve on the blue ribbon panel of people who will help us promote this standard. And finally, for the more than 40% of you, 42% of you who said yes, we are going to have a business advisory task force here. Now, if you're interested in this, just email me and tell me a little bit about you can reach me at CEO@IACET.org, CEO, Chief Executive Officer. And tell me a little bit about your organization's competency-based training effort. And if you'd like to be on the CBT Business Advisory Task Force, this is a group that will consider the adoption of the standard in their own organization and advise. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't mean that you have to implement the standard, but it means that your organization could help promote it or at least consider it or compare what our standard is to what you have done. Doesn't mean you have to adopt it. It just means, now, if you wanted to adopt it, that would be all the better. But we're looking for organizations that specifically where individuals work for companies that have implemented competency-based programs and who could help us and advise us on getting our standard adopted in the industry. So keep that in mind as we move forward. And yes, thank you. And we see competency is got a little typo there. So thank you for that, William. We appreciate that. So that's our competency-based training initiative. And finally, let's go to our petroleum and natural gas. This is an exciting initiative, and I'm going to be quick because most of you are not in the petroleum and natural gas industry. However, here's a couple things that IACET has done. We have a petroleum and natural gas advisory board consisting of some of the largest companies in the world. These companies have advised us on the additional requirements that need to be imposed for providers working in the petroleum and natural gas industry. So in other words, they looked at the IACET standard and they thought it was an excellent part to start. An excellent standard in which to begin, but they needed more. They wanted additional, heavier requirements than what most other providers in other industries want to meet. So let's take a look at just a few of those. When we got our petroleum and natural gas advisory group together, what they decided was that they wanted to look at greater vetting of personnel involved in the design and delivery of training programs. They wanted extended requirements involving the assurance of validity and reliability and learning event assessment. So in other words, when you have a learning event, how are you really assessing and going in? Now, IACET requires right now assessment of objectives, but we don't really have any criteria on the rigor of those assessments. That changes with the addendum, the petroleum and natural gas addendum to the IACET standard. The petroleum and natural gas industry wanted extended requirements for processes for managing changing content in training organizations. So in other words, how are we ensuring, how are these companies that have constant change, what are their processes for dealing with that change? And IACET has some things that are involved with that, but the requirements under the P&G are more stringent. So keep in mind what will happen, and there's other things as well. The P&G standard is not ready for public. It will be ready around the first of the year when it's finalized. Our board of directors has approved a tentative version of it, but the final version will be coming early in 2018, and it'll be ready for public exposure then. After that, we will be offering accreditation specifically to oil and gas companies, oil and gas providers that want to meet the higher standard, because what we anticipate are some of these companies that are mentioned here before will be actually requiring anybody that works for them as a provider of education Anybody who comes in and subcontracts with these organizations will have to meet the IACET P&G addendum, and have that endorsement from us to work for those companies in a capacity of a training contractor. So that's work that we're pursuing right now. And again, we have the backing of even the Federal Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, which we're thrilled to have a federal involvement in this. And here's the bottom line on our oil and gas industry. The reason they feel so strongly about education standards is because they believe the oil industry is about to come back. As you know, gas prices have started to increase gradually. The oil and gas industry will continue to come back, and as they believe that it will, especially next year, they don't want to relearn from death and injury. Keep in mind, the oil and gas industry has lost over half of its employees due to the downturn in the economy in the last several years. Well, as people come back into that industry, they're going to have to be trained. And we're not even talking about the egress of workers due to age and retirement. As we all know, the aging workforce in our country and around the world, for that matter, is more and more of a concern, and training is a huge part. So nobody wants to relearn lessons for the new people coming into the industry through death and injury, and that's why these standards are so important. Will the P&G be used in the USA and Canada? That's questions from Tanya. Yes, we anticipate that anyone who would be working for these organizations, whether it even be in Saudi Arabia or other oil-producing nations, would be applicable here, and we will be actively promoting that. So that gives you a broad overview of what's happening at IACET. Let me go ahead and give you a few more just resources. Here's some upcoming events. If you want some more specific questions about IACET or accreditation, I would encourage you to look at our December 13th IACET Application Assistance Webinar. Terry LaLaberte will be heading that up for us. And also, too, we have, if you go to our IACET.org site and click events, you can see where our new workshops, all of our workshops are virtual, by the way. We're going to be making those virtual so people can attend from anywhere, but still an interactive experience, and you'll need a webcam to participate if you don't want to come live. So with that, I wanted to also introduce you very quickly. I know we're just past the top of the hour a little bit, and I wanted to bring in Peter Finn, who is our chairman, and I wanted to get him. Let's see if I can find him in our long list here. And Peter, here we go. Peter, I've unmuted you. Peter, would you like to say hello to everybody and kind of close us out today?
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Joe. And thanks everyone for joining the town hall. I really appreciate the efforts of our volunteers and our staff. Certainly what Joe and Carol and everyone has presented today is a testament to the collaboration between the volunteers and our staff and the great work that's being done. And I hope that some of you will consider joining the task force that Joe had brought up earlier on the competency-based training. And yeah, that's about it. Nothing else really to add. So thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you, Peter. Also, too, if those of you who would be interested in promoting your organization with IACET, if you go to IACET.org/webinar, we would love to give you the opportunity to present to your colleagues a continuing education and training experience, something that would keep us up to date, something that would leave your cohorts and your colleagues here within IACET with some professional education on continuing education and training issues. If you'd like to submit a webinar that would be presented, normally we get great results on this. We set a deadline of December 20th. If you go to IACET.org/webinar, you can see an announcement on how you can submit a proposal. And we, again, would very much like to give you the opportunity to share, promote your organization as well. You can go there and see how that works. And if you have any questions, you can contact me. So for right now, we're going to take for Joe McClary, Peter Finn, for Carol Martzoff. Thank you, Carol, for being with us. We'll officially close, but what we will do is stick online here just for probably about another 15 or so minutes to answer questions specifically. We don't want you to walk away without your questions being being answered. So with that, we'll formally close our time together. And please let us know if you have any questions. And with that, we'll officially close. But if you'll hang on for about 30 seconds, we will pick up with our question and answer session more so in just a couple minutes. If you got what you need, have a great day. It was nice to have everybody here. All right. Well, thank you for those who are hanging around just a little while to have a few more questions answered. I'm going to take down all of our hands right now. That has been reset, and I'm going to go ahead and do some of our questions that we are working with now. So let's go to, here's a question from Michael Coleman. Is there a guideline for the extent of instructor or expert training and development? Michael, the answer is no. I think we do not have a specific guideline. So for example, if you have a subject matter expert that's been in the industry for 30 years, but he's had no documentable evidence of improving themselves in training and development, what we would hope is that you would impose some, or that you would actually integrate some. There is not a particular a guideline that we're going to say meets or doesn't. What we think is what we're looking for there is the broad guidance. I don't know if Dan Hiltz is here either. Dan is not here today, I do not believe. Yeah, so but Carol may be gone as well. But
no.
Carol, what are your thoughts? Am I summarizing that right? What are your beliefs on generally when he talks about, if you're looking for some type of specific guide on how qualified an instructor needs to be in those areas, what would your response be?
Well, for most of our IACET standard, we're not prescriptive. We don't tell you exactly what you need to do. You can develop your own list of criteria for instructors. And I know I'm also an AP, or Urban Engineers is an AP, and frequently we have instructors who are very strong in their technical expertise and pretty weak when it comes to learning event development and that sort of thing. So we actually have a session that we have with them. So we, as fast as we can and as effectively as we can, get them well versed in adult learning as much as they need to be an instructor. And we have a document that they actually have to sign saying that the instructor understands that these are the criteria. And so you can actually develop whatever you think would be good for your organization, the requirements for the instructors and the knowledge they have to have with regard to learning event development and execution. So no, we do not indicate that in the standard, but you can develop your own.
Michael, that was a great question. I hope that answered it. Here's another question from Lisa Willard that I think will extend on that. Lisa says this: we have a situation, as Carol described, a different presenter each month. Each session is 1.5 hours. If there was a person in our organization who is responsible for reviewing, helping the presenters shape their presentations, can they be the one to have more formal learning methodology and instruction? Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I would tell you that most great organizations that are having instructors like this also perhaps may even have a webinar of their own about that provides a very brief training session on how to do instruction. But certainly a facilitator. I think Wendy S. here says she loves the idea of having a facilitator. We found that that's very helpful in our organization, especially on webinars where there are multiple people there. So that's good. So
and I'd like to say I agree with that. We always have a facilitator, and that's very helpful.
Pam Wright asked this question: how long does an organization have to be in conformance with the 2018 version of the IACET standard? So, for example, if somebody's going to reaccredit today, how long will they, obviously they can't do all of the things, or some of the things might be a little bit difficult. For example, to show history, or if they didn't have an organizational evaluation plan that was kicked in earlier this year, how would that go forward? Carol, would you have any comments on that?
For you to be an AP, even though we emphasized it more in the 2018 standard, we're always looking for continuous improvement. So I think a lot of what we're asking in the reapplication, you may not realize you've done it, but you probably did do. You just didn't have to document it the same way in the past. So, I mean, I'm happy to talk to you just one-on-one if you'd like. If Joe, if you want to give me her information, I can talk to her about her particular questions if you'd like.
Sure. That leads us, one of the common questions for new providers, the ones who have never accredited before, is how long do you need to have any history behind you? In other words, can you just start a new education business and then come get accreditation? And my response is always this: IACET's accreditation is not an accreditation that's based upon what you tell us you're going to do. It's an accreditation that's based upon what you're telling us you're going to do and what you have done. So not only is it specifying those processes and what you will be doing and are doing, it's a documentation of what you've done in the past. Now, technically, I think in the past we have recommended about a year of history. In other words, you're in business a year, you're offering in compliance with the IACET standard. We've also seen it, I've seen providers come in as little as 3 months and be able to demonstrate compliance. But the bottom line is, yes, you have to be in compliance. For reaccreditation, I think most of the compliance there, for example, if you're doing an organizational evaluation, I think some of those things can be done where you are. So especially when it comes to identification of student identity, how are you going to be doing that? How will your processes have changed? What we would probably want to see is that is actually going to be occurring. So keep that in mind, and that process will be happening in the future, even though you may not have been doing it in the past because it wasn't required. We would want to see that in the future that you would be doing that, and you may have very, very limited, if any, historical documentation that would show that you had actually done it. We understand that. So as Carol said, they're looking for ongoing improvement, ensuring that organizations are moving in the right direction. And frankly, this has been a good standard where it's designed, the 2018 is really designed for you to jump in at any point and be able to comply with some of those core standards. They're just basically tweaks. So Pam, I hope that helps. If it doesn't, give us an email on the screen that you have here, and we'll be happy to follow up with that. All right, so we have, we're a small, this is from Mary. Mary says, we are a small nonprofit who only offers one course. Wouldn't 1.4 item be then the same as the program evaluation? No, it really wouldn't be, because there's going to be things that are being evaluated in 1.4 that aren't evaluated in your program evaluation. Those are designed to be separate. And so those would be separate, Mary. So keep that in mind as you move forward. How do you do site visits for a virtual organization? Well, you meet someplace. Our providers will meet inside of a hotel if necessary. They want to put a face with a name. They want to verify organizational effectiveness. They want to be able to see your processes. In many cases, they want to meet the people who are involved, and then they make a determination whether or not you meet that standard. I can tell you what we are out to ensure is that we are not accrediting diploma mills or organizations that have really no commitment to continuing education and training. So that's important to recognize. All right, so I think we are knocking out the questions one after the other here, and I'm just processing through just a few more. Janine Clark asked, will it count if the subject matter expert works directly with an instructional designer? I think that could certainly be a part of the process, Janine. Absolutely, that could be a part of the process. And SMEs, your subject matter expert, especially if this is in an online environment where you're developing asynchronous distance learning, most certainly. In this case, it would be your instructional designer that has the educational background, and your SME is there to essentially there to advise on the content. If this would be different, however, if this is an in-class course where the instructor in class is expected to deploy or employ certain adult learning methods. So keep that in mind, that there would be a difference in that between online and classroom, but absolutely that would help comply and could be a part of your process to maintain integrity in the people who are facilitating your programs and need that professional development program. All right, I think we answered Barbara's question. Is IACET accreditation recognized by CHEA, U.S. Department of Education, or a similar body? Great question. This is Michael. Michael, no, we looked at getting, IACET could very easily, frankly, go to examine and get the United States Department of Education recognition. And I'll tell you why we don't. Because about 9/10 of our providers would not be able to meet those standards. The United States Department of Education do a lot of things that are relevant to IACET's audience, to the group that IACET serves. So if you want a U.S. Department of recognition, for example, you're going to want to go to IACET, the Accrediting Council for Continuing Education and Training, and you're going to have to pay about 3 to 5 times as much as it costs to get IACETs. You're also going to have to give them information on your students. You're going to have to give them rosters. You're going to have to do all types of things that go way beyond what IACET requires. And frankly, for our organizations and our purpose and our mission, aren't necessary. So what we feel that we're serving a very unique niche in the accreditation market. And U.S. Department of Education, I've been to Washington. I've met with their whole accreditation staff. And frankly, right now, it's just not something that we felt the need to pursue. I'm not as familiar with CHEA, but I'll certainly look into that. We are recognized by ANSI, by the way. Somebody asked this question earlier, so here's the answer to this. The IACET 2018 standard is accredited by the American National Standards Institute. That application was submitted and we have received notice. So anybody who is accredited today or anytime in the future under the 2018 standard, that is accredited by the American National Standards Institute, which means that essentially IACET follows a very prescribed and rigorous process in the development of our standard. We have to jump through all types of hoops to ensure the integrity of our standard. So for example, when we rolled out the 2018 standard, we had to do 2 public exposure drafts. We had to respond in person to every recommendation anybody ever had about this standard. We had to respond back to them with whether or not we adopted it or whether or not and why we didn't. And it was thousands of documents that we had to track and process through to maintain that ANSI, American National Standards Institute standard. So keep that in mind, that we do comply with a governing body as well known as ANSI. So keep that in mind.
Just a quick little correction. You had mentioned that you replied to each one in person. You meant individually. You didn't respond in person.
That's correct. You're right. We didn't go to their house, but we responded. You're right. Responded to them individually as we had to write them back, and we had to tell them what they. Thank you, Carol. That's an engineer for you. They got those details. But you're absolutely right. We didn't go to everybody's house. So the link, okay, great. And we got a couple issues with we'll still look at the guides. Somebody said we may need to refresh their screen. Let's keep moving here with a few other questions. To be clear, this is from Christopher G. To be clear, if we provide online training through a secure username and password, LMS, and a statement of identity confirmation for each assessment, does this meet your student identity requirement? I would say that from what I see, absolutely. And I would say that you wouldn't need to verify identity at the beginning of every assessment. And when I say assessment, I mean formative quiz. When I say assessment, there's all types. There's 3 different types. There's the pre-course assessment or a pre-assessment to measure a student's knowledge before they enter the event. There's the formative assessment that they use throughout the event, the quizzes, the remediation that happens when a student gets a question wrong. And then you have obviously a summative assessment that's usually higher stakes. There's not as much remediation. It's a pass-fail type of assessment. So at some juncture, we would suggest that declaration of student identity occurs somewhere in there, perhaps at the beginning of the course, perhaps and if you have the secure username and password, I can't imagine a situation where that would not comply. Carol, would you agree with that?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. Yes.
Okay, and Christopher, I even think that the attestation is extra. I think that the username and password would probably suffice. I think you'd probably be on better, while I'm not a lawyer, that statement of them attesting that they are who they say they are goes a long way as well. Well, thank you for keeping me on task and telling me when to take those polls away. Sometimes that gets distracting here amongst all the flying things that are going on my desktop. So we appreciate everybody. Have a great day. If you have questions, please reach out to us. Take care.
All right. Bye, everybody.